Today on Boston Girl Bakes, I'm showing you how to make these healthy cinnamon rolls. I know when you hear the word healthy, you might not be thinking also delicious, but I'm hoping to prove you wrong today with these healthy cinnamon rolls. Now, I know the word healthy can mean a lot of different things to different people, but for me, as a kid who grew up on a farm in the 80s and 90s, to me, that means using more wholesome ingredients. So we're gonna replace the white flour and white sugar today, and we're gonna replace it with 100% whole wheat flour, coconut sugar, and maple syrup, and I'm going to use almond milk and coconut oil, which means they're also secretly dairy-free and vegan. And let's not forget, they're still ridiculously delicious. To start, we're going to make our filling. We're simply going to combine our coconut sugar, cinnamon, and salt in a bowl. Then I'm stirring in my melted coconut oil, but you could use melted butter or oil if that's what you have on hand, and vanilla. If you don't want to taste the flavor of coconut, then I recommend using a refined coconut oil. Otherwise, an unrefined coconut oil is going to impart some coconut flavor. You're going to stir that all together, and the mixture should resemble wet sand at this point. Once that's mixed together, you can simply set that aside and we'll get started on our dough. In a large bowl, you want to whisk together the warm milk. I'm using almond milk, but really any milk will work here. Our yeast and coconut sugar in a bowl, and we're going to let that sit until it's foamy and bubbly for about 5 minutes. Let's talk about the yeast for a minute. If you're new to making any kind of cinnamon roll, we're going to be using yeast in order for these rolls to rise. I'm using instant yeast, but you can use active dry yeast if that's what you have on hand. You're just going to need to simply increase the rising times. So I'm using instant or rapid rise yeast. A couple of things to note when you're making something using yeast. First, make sure you're checking the expiration date on your yeast packet. Yeast does have a shelf life, and on the back of the packet you should see an expiration date that's going to tell you if your yeast is still active, which aka means it's going to let your rolls rise. It's going to come alive and be bubbly. If you find that your yeast is expired, throw it out and get a new packet. The other thing you want to pay attention to when working with yeast is to make sure to not use too hot of a liquid or you're going to kill the yeast. Yeast is a living thing. We need to make sure that we don't kill it with using too hot of a liquid. I recommend using about 110 degrees Fahrenheit of a liquid. Recommend using a thermometer. If you don't have one, my simple trick is simply stick your own finger in that liquid. If it's too hot for you to put your own finger in it, it's definitely going to be too hot and kill the yeast. And if you kill the yeast, you're not going to have any rolls that rise. Next, we'll add our flour, our baking powder, and salt together in a large bowl. And you're going to stir in that bubbly yeast mixture and 2 tablespoons of melted coconut oil or butter until a dough begins to form. I'm using white whole wheat flour, which is a little bit different than maybe the regular whole wheat flour you see in the store. I'm using King Arthur flour, white whole wheat flour, which is in the orange bag, versus the whole wheat flour, which is usually found in the red bag. The difference is the white whole wheat flour is just a different variety of whole wheat, and it's a little bit softer in texture. So you get everything you love about baking with white flour, which is that softness and that beautiful fluffy texture, but you get all that whole grain goodness baking with whole wheat. So if you can find it, use white whole wheat flour. The dough is going to be a little bit sticky at this point, which is what we want. You might be tempted to add more flour, but you don't want to do that, otherwise you're going to end up with really dry, dense dough. Once the dough has come together, you want to transfer it to a well-floured counter, and you're going to knead it until the dough ball forms, about 2 minutes. So another thing I love about these rolls is that they only go through one rise, so they come together a lot faster than other traditional cinnamon rolls. So once you have your dough mixed together, it's time to roll out the dough and assemble our cinnamon rolls. You're going to roll the dough into about a 12 by 9 inch rectangle. Don't worry if it's not perfect. You're going to brush your dough then with a tablespoon of melted coconut oil, or again, you can use melted butter. You want to leave about a 1/2 inch border on the far edge. That's where we're going to seal up the dough at the end. Then you'll sprinkle your filling all over the butter and make sure to just press it firmly into the dough. Now I have a couple options for you on how to roll up the dough that I've used over the years. One is to simply roll it up into a tight log and then use a serrated knife to cut the log into your rolls. Another trick I have for you is to take a piece of dental floss, make sure it's not mint flavored, place it under your dough, and then simply bring it up and crisscross it so it cuts through the dough nice and neatly. This will ensure you don't squish that beautiful spiral in the middle. Another option for you Instead of rolling and cutting the dough into rolls, you will roll out your dough, cut the dough into strips, and roll up each strip individually. Use whichever method works for you. Once you have your cinnamon rolls cut and shaped, place it into your pan, and then it's time to let them rise. We need to let the yeast do its thing. You're gonna cover with plastic wrap and let it rise for 30 minutes until the dough springs back lightly when pressed. Now remember, if you're using active dry yeast, you are gonna wanna increase the time that you let the dough rise, about 45 minutes to even an hour. And again, the rising time can always vary whenever you're working with any kind of yeasted product. It's gonna depend a lot on the temperature of your own kitchen. If you have a cold kitchen, right now it's winter for me, I'm making these in January, healthy. So it might take a little bit longer than 30 minutes. So don't go by necessarily the time, but the feel of the dough. You wanna press your finger into the dough slightly, and you should see it kind of rise back slowly. If it bounces back really quickly, it needs more time. If it stays sunk in, then you've let it rise a little too long and you want to get those into the oven right away. So if you have a colder kitchen, give it a little bit more time to rise. If you have a warmer kitchen, you might find that these rolls rise even quicker. Once your rolls have risen, it's time to go ahead and bake them. We're going to bake them in the middle of our oven at 350 degrees and bake them for about 23 to 25 minutes. Then once they're baked, go ahead and remove them from the oven. You're going to want to let them cool for about 5 minutes. Of course, no cinnamon roll is complete without a glaze, right? I usually like using a cream cheese icing, but I'm going to lighten things up a little bit today and make a maple syrup glaze instead. So in a small bowl, whisk together all your glaze ingredients until smooth. And there you go, you are ready to enjoy your healthy cinnamon rolls. One rise, 100% whole wheat flour. These are absolutely fabulous cinnamon rolls with a lot less guilt, which is perfect right now for January. So I hope I've convinced you today that baking something healthy doesn't mean you have to sacrifice on flavor at all. If you love this recipe, then be sure to check out the rest of my recipes and don't forget to hit subscribe below. And until next time, happy baking.